I don't care how much you hate Donald Trump.
Yeah.
You cannot. I saw enough clips of Biden this morning to go, you cannot sell this in any way, manner, shape, and form. Like this is somehow reasonable or whatever. So then the bigger question is, why did they stage this show
as early as they did?
Yeah. Well, it would be to create a conversation to justify replacing Biden, to have a coup within the Democratic Party.
Right, but who are they going to replace him with?
Take the first step towards online privacy. Get NordVPN.
Hi everybody, I am joined by Faisal from Buna Capital and Tom Luongo from Gold, Goats and Guns. Links in the description below. We are going to be talking about macro politics, macroeconomics, and eschatology. Now, I did a video with Faisal a few weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago. I'll link to that in the description below, where we talk about eschatology. And eschatology is the philosophy of the end of the world, and in particular what we talked about was Islamic eschatology, how Muslims see the end of the world is going to come about and how it fits in with what's happening now. And we have Tom, macro political commentator extraordinaire. We've done a short video about the Chevron defense, so go watch that. And in this video, we're going to be talking about eschatology, the state of the world, and oh my goodness. Oh, hi Faisal, hi Tom. I should say assalamu alaikum Faisal, and assalamu alaikum to you Tom as well, which means peace be unto you.
I hope that that the weather gods and the bandwidth gods are kind to us today. Let's just say that. So
yes. Very good, Faisal. I don't know where you want to start. Where do you want to start with this conversation?
Yeah, so just to clarify on eschatology. So eschatology is really it's just the definition of the word is the study of endings. And from a religious standpoint, at least the way I understand eschatology, it's not so much about the end of the world. It's more about the transition from whatever the thousands of years humans have been around so far into what will ultimately be our final chapter, and that final chapter can last. Who knows how long? Islam doesn't talk about how long it lasts. It could be 100 years, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, 1,000,000,000 years. I don't know. So I'm not prepared to say that where the end is nigh, the judgment day is coming, sort of thing. But I am very confident that we are going through a significant transition of human evolution, human civilization from where we've come from into where we're going, and that once we get to where we're going, there's a period of time that needs to elapse before we get there still. Once we get there, it could be a very long time, it could be a very short time, who the heck knows? At least Islam doesn't preach to that point. Maybe other religions do, I don't know.
Well, what you're saying, Faisal, I can see consistencies with that so far with what you said with other philosophies, like the way that the solar system cycle is changing around the cosmos, the whole notion of the yugas, Hindu philosophy, the talk about a great awakening among astrologers,
right? Age of Aquarius type stuff.
Yeah, and also the fourth turning work. Fits in all the much longer cycles too. Okay, Tom, anything you want to say about this? Where we're at? Why you wanted to come on? Because I invited you on. Faisal said, "Look, let's do a video. You, me, and Tom, right?"
Well, aside from the fact because Faisal and I are friends, and I just like chatting with Faisal, and we do so, and I don't, what I'm ultimately interested in. I've been seeing this from a variety of other perspectives as well for a long time. You've got Martin Armstrong's 309-year cycle. You've got the solar cycles within multiple overlapping solar cycles within the sun's magnetic dynamos. You've got just a lot of things all occurring all at the same time, and then you have to wonder, like, are these things all connected to each other? And there is the first bout of thunder. So if I do drop out in the middle of something, Faisal will just pick up where I left off and keep moving. Eventually, I'll come back. And then when you I've been feeling this for an awfully long time about how this is just for, in so many ways, it just feels like this is the crescendo of a variety of different um, cycles that you reach a peak and then you go into the next part of you go into the next cycle and then whatnot, and just it feels that way going all the way back to the formation of central banks in the 1694 with the Bank of England, and then you have to just kind of look at it and say, have they reached their moment where they've run out of the ability to lever up those systems, and with each passing of the cycle, with each roughly 85-year cycle, talking about the fourth turning or chondrity of winters or chondrity of cycles or whatever, basically every so many human life cycles, because an average human is around 75 to 80 years old, 80 years, that you hit a crescendo of that system, and then that system is then collapses under the weight of its own internal inconsistencies, and then a new system has to be born out of that one. Whether that's part of an even larger cycle, and an even larger cycle is, that's up for debate and discussion. And I think that having that kind of discussion is always fun. I don't know if it's not necessarily the only way to look at a particular set of problems or a situation. And this is one of the things that I get reminded about by my historian partner Dexter White all the time, is that it's not always just one thing or one factor that leads into things, but history is an agglomeration of all of those, and that it's just these are interesting filters through which to view current events, and then which is part of what we do every day, right?
Yeah, and like Dexter, like you mentioned, Dexter just said that it's an agglomeration of a bunch of different histories. It's political history, it's military history, it's monetary history, it's economic history, it's history, right? It's
philosophical history, it's religious history. It's all of these things are all bound up together. Yes.
100%. And it's kind of like what I think I described it on our previous conversation, Rich, where I see, Tom contributes what he contributes, and it might be multiple sheets of tracing paper that Tom contributes to the stack. Alex Craner, he comes at it from a historical perspective, but also from a financial perspective sometimes. So, throw those two sheets onto the paper, and everybody's contributing all their different sheets. And, what I really aspire to do, I think, is, because I recognize that all of it is relevant, none of it is irrelevant. It's just sort of very challenging once you've got this stack of paper and you're shining the light through it to really make out what is the image, this holographic image that's forming in my mind with all of these contributions of all of these great minds. And so what I'm really trying to do is call it the grand unifying theory, call it the glue that binds everything together, whatever metaphor makes sense. But I'm going to call it the grand unifying theory that brings it all together and brings shape and form to all of this. And I think this is where, I find personally that eschatology, and it's not just Islamic eschatology, it's eschatology of the Abrahamic religions as a whole. So I have delved into Jewish eschatology and Christian eschatology as well, in order to form this framework that brings everything together and then allows us to look at what's rather confusing, upside down, topsy-turvy world, particularly in recent years, and go, I see, everything sort of kind of just fits into place and makes sense. And, one of the most resonating examples of that was last night's performance on stage between these two presidential candidates, Biden versus Trump, up on stage. And for me, I was watching that and it's like, this is a total setup. Biden has been totally set up to be on stage, and he's probably even groomed into it to have his body language just be absolutely, dismal, to the point that the tail is able to wag the dog and convince the public that Biden was a great man, but it's time for him to move on. We're going to get him off stage, and we're going to bring maybe somebody else in for the Democratic candidate. And it just appeared to me terribly, terribly staged. And I don't think I would have had that viewpoint so quickly while watching it on my screen if I didn't have this overall unifying theory that I've started to develop in my mind. So it took what could have been maybe an upsetting, depending on your political proclivities, it could have been an upsetting, it could have been a joyful moment to watch Biden perform so miserably on stage. But either way you look at it, without a unifying theory to wrap around it, it might have turned out to be really confusing at the same time. So, this is why I
Okay, so
find the eschatology thing is relevant.
well, I was going to say that. And it's like, okay, so what did you see? Because I didn't actually watch it last night because I can't stomach doing this stuff anymore. I spent the evening
Yeah,
chatting with friends that I haven't seen in weeks, and I'm like, I'm going to do that, and
yeah,
I'm not going to watch this because this is clearly not something I can stomach. So
yeah. So
Just,
I didn't intend
just
to
so I
watch
can
it.
get my orient, I didn't watch it. I listened to it at high
Oh,
speed today on my
oh,
player.
yeah. I don't think you would have gotten out of it what I got out of it just from an audio feed.
Yeah.
So I didn't intend to watch it at all, but my wife, who was flying home from Chicago yesterday, her flight got repeatedly delayed. So I found myself just alone at home at 9 o'clock when the debate started. So I was like, oh, well, I'm just sitting here waiting for her to get home. So I may as well flip it on. So, and I ended up watching the whole thing pretty much. Um, so what I saw was, like I said, it felt like a totally choreographed, staged event. Um, them trying to hide the fact that it was totally choreographed and staged as much as possible. But, I saw Biden present himself terribly, like truly, truly terribly, more terribly than you would have expected out of a man who you've witnessed mentally decline over the course of the last 3.5 years.
Yeah.
You're
Just on,
expecting him to perform. Yeah.
so just on that, he walked on in a studio where there's no audience, waving to an audience that wasn't there.
There you go. Like the idiocy of this thing, right? So, you expect a certain amount of decline out of Biden because, what haven't we seen that makes us guffaw at his ineptitude? But he maxed it out. Like he was given some acting cues and he acted it all out on stage. On the other hand, Trump was the usual Trump. He was less of a barking dog than usual, but I think that's probably because of the rules with the microphone turned off. He's like, well, there's no point in me barking because no one's going to hear my barks anyways. So he was a little bit better
right.
behaved, and he was the same old guy as usual. But Biden was there, while Trump would talk, the camera would zero in and focus on Biden. His whole face would sag, his shoulders would sag, he'd slump and he'd stare into the abyss in front of him like he was just a lost soul, like a puppy dog who had been abandoned and didn't know how to find his way home, whether mentally or physically, right? Yeah. And they just repeatedly showed that image. It just, like, to me, it just reminded me of the movie Wag the Dog. I don't know if you've seen Wag the Dog. I'm sure.
I have. I saw Wag the Dog when it first came out.
Yeah. Just manufacturing.
So yes, I didn't get I didn't get that download. So normally, this again, one of the benefits of having Dexter White as a friend and business partner is that he's incredibly astute to editing, where the camera's placed, all of these things. He was telling me like last night, like, dude, turn on CNN and watch the meltdown. It's epic and it's so brilliant. The after party show, because they were like, he's like,
right,
and the thing is, Faisal, and I'm going to push back on you just a little bit on this. That may have been their intent with the show itself, but I can tell you that their reaction to Biden was real.
You mean
like, I don't think they knew
reaction.
the Van Joneses and all the commentators afterwards were like, holy shit. They weren't acting. They weren't acting.
Okay, and, I actually didn't even watch the post show.
Really. No, I'm trying to give you the review of the post show that I got. Again, I didn't see it, but from someone whose opinion on this I absolutely respect. You know, I would say, and I think Dexter and I are going to try and do a podcast on this where he's going to go over this stuff.
Okay.
And I am getting rain coming through, so if the connection's unstable, it's because of that. That they were in complete meltdown mode. And then by this morning, I saw a short clip of Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski on Morning Joe try to spin this as, no, that's just the normal Joe. He's been this way for 50 years. He's imperfect. I'm like, really, Joe Scarborough? How many pictures of 12-year-olds do they have in the manila folder on you, dude? Like, seriously, to try and sell this?
Yeah.
Like, I don't care how much you hate Donald Trump.
Yeah.
You cannot. I saw enough clips of Biden this morning to go, you cannot sell this in any way, manner, shape, and form. Like, this is somehow reasonable or whatever. So
Yeah.
then the bigger question is, why did they stage this show?
As early as they did.
Yeah. Well, it would be
Right.
to create a conversation to
Yeah.
justify replacing Biden, to have a
Right.
coup within the Democratic
Right.
Party.
But who are they going to replace him with?
That's a bigger question.
Martin Armstrong came out this afternoon and said this is all a big setup by the neocons to insert Hillary into the process. Well, there's two problems with that. And I'm not saying that there isn't some skullduggery going on that's going to try and get Hillary into the nomination. But I got two problems with this. One, her name is Kamala Harris, and I've been telling you folks, telling everybody for going back 9 months, a year now. I said Kamala Harris holds all the cards because she is the vice president, and there's an opportunity here for a deal with the Republicans to 25th Amendment his ass out.
Yeah.
And ascend her to the presidency, at which point she's in charge of the party. She controls the superdelegates within the DNC. And there's no path to Hillary taking the coming in sweeping into the convention and getting everything. Biden owns the superdelegates within the DNC. She can't take them from him. Like the reason she won the nomination in 2016 was because she controlled the superdelegates and she was able to freeze out Bernie Sanders. Right? He controls them this time. And that means Obama controls them. And Hillary is not going to be able to break that, even with this performance. So I'm like, I personally, I just think this is going to wind up being, Trump versus Harris, if anything. And if so, it's going to be Trump versus Harris in such a way that Harris cuts a deal for her to be the nominee, but she's going to lose. And she's going to be able to walk out with some form of dignity off the stage. But I don't know. We'll see.
What if I heard this from some source, and I can't remember where it came from, but it did resonate a little bit. What if they pull a deal with Kamala, like Obama pulled with Hillary back when he became the nominee, or was it? I can't remember when it happened, but at any rate, Obama told I think Hillary, "We'll make you Secretary of State. You just it's not your turn right now.
Mm-hmm.
Let it be Obama." In the parallel that I'm trying to draw here, what if the Hillary camp goes to Harris and says, "Listen, we'll appoint you to the Supreme Court because she comes from a legal background, if I'm not mistaken, right? We'll give you a position of prestige on the Supreme Court. I mean, you haven't been angling for the presidency nearly as long as Hillary has, so let it be Hillary's turn, and here you can have this prestigious seat on the courts."
Yeah, I don't buy that because I don't think that tracks with Kamala Harris one whit. I think she would. Part of me just says, look, yes, the old, if you map to the British neocons, right, that Anglophone neocons, like, do they want Hillary Clinton? Yes. Does Davos want continuity and the destruction of the United States? Yes. How do you do that? You keep Biden on the ticket, and then you leave Trump in a terrible position. They have checkmated themselves, is the way I look at this. And I just don't see that Harris has any reason to step aside, even for a Supreme Court position. What are you going to do? Kill Alito and then stick Harris? It's not going to work. They have to literally, there's no way they can steal the election for Biden. You can't pass over an African American, what's the word I'm looking for? Woman of color for an old white oligarch, and expect the Democratic Party base to go along with this at this point in time.
Right.
Okay, that's not going to fly. Like Hillary is literally she's the boogeyman, and she's clearly angling for a return to glory. But honestly, we talk about January 6th, okay?
Sorry, Tom, we lost you there. Sorry, Tom, we lost you there. She's clearly angling for a return.
Yeah, sorry. So Hillary's clearly angling for a return, but look at the timing on all of this, right? It's the end of Q2. This is the last trading. We're doing this like an hour before the end of trading for Q2 2024. Big day. We've held the markets in amber for 2 weeks now as we approach the end of Q2, when the French go to the polls this weekend to start their process of putting Marine Le Pen in power. You've got the British elections on Wednesday, okay? And you've got Viktor Orban taking over the European Council on Monday. Okay. So it's Q3. The Chevron deference gets nuked. Biden is revealed to be completely and utterly incompetent. It's elder abuse at this point, as I've said before. And you've got all of this happening. There's something else that I was trying to talk, and the Chevron deference and the J6 thing. All of this hits on the same day. There's no coincidences here. So this thing was scheduled for this date on purpose, and maybe Biden was sent out as a sacrificial lamb. I'd be honest with you, folks. Maybe they didn't think the Supreme Court had the balls to nuke Chevron and the J6 thing. Maybe that's what. Maybe they didn't expect this. It's like move, counter move, and now they have no. And it was like, to me, it just feels like the whole Davos thing is about to get completely fucking rolled, like completely rolled.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's going to be a Trump restitution, whether they like it or not.
Yeah.
Whether they like it or not, now they have to figure out what they're going to scramble.
Yeah. So from an
we're just winning. Maybe we're just winning.
Maybe. I'm not inclined to start celebrating too early, but if we bring eschatology into it, I think that with respect to the whole democratic leadership question, I think from a grander scale, it proves to be inconsequential. It could prove to be quite consequential in the immediate term at the level of internal civility within America. That it may have consequences on that. But from a big picture perspective, I don't think it bears any consequence, because I believe that the victory of Trump is necessary in order for the next steps to take place in this grand project that they call Project Zionism.
Now that is a controversial statement that I want to hear more about. And I know I've heard parts of this before. Every time you go through it, Faisal, I'm not completely. I've heard it multiple times, and it's like me going on about the Civil Rights Act in Israel and Gaza a month ago. Every time I went through, it took me 6 or 7 times to go through it until I finally it gelled in my head what was going on. So go ahead, run with it, dude. I want to hear this.
Okay, so you've heard me say it many times before that Operation Zionism was never about creating a homeland for the Jews to keep them safe. That may have been what inspired Theodore Herzl at the beginning, but once the British got their teeth into it, it wasn't about that anymore. It was about effecting Pax Judaica as their vessel for a permanent hegemonic, domineering, oppressive empire over the world. Okay, so if the goal is Pax Judaica and you're going to hijack the eschatological narrative in order to get to Pax Judaica, then you need to foment Armageddon, because whether it's Islamic eschatology, and I think it's safe to say it's true in Christian eschatology as well, and certainly true in Jewish eschatology, Pax Judaica does not come about without Armageddon first. So Armageddon first is from an eschatological perspective, is a fixed point. We have to get, or they have to get to Armageddon in order to get Pax Judaica to be effected. Now, how do you get to Armageddon? You can't just, have a Hillary Clinton, for example, foaming at the mouth warmonger in place. You've got some boxes to tick along the way such that it fulfills eschatological narrative. And when you get into Netanyahu and his personal and professional political history, you realize that you come to learn that he was heavily influenced. The reason he's such a messianic minded politician is he was heavily influenced by a rabbi called Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who passed away in 1994. And Schneerson took Netanyahu under his wing and mentored him and said, I've had a vision, and you're the person who's destined to usher in the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah. You will become the leader of Israel, and you will be the last leader of Israel, and after you comes the Messiah. I've had this vision, go make it happen. And there's plenty of articles and stuff, and even in Netanyahu in his own speeches, he talks about this. this stuff, that, how heavily influenced he was by Schneerson, and he's here to bring about the Messiah. Okay, so what branch of Judaism then is pushing this agenda? It's called the Chabad Lubavitch, I think. I'll just call it Chabad. I don't know if you'd call it a sect or a branch or whatever it is. It's
those are the ones with the tunnels in New York a few months ago.
Yeah, they're the same guys. Exactly. So it's a branch of, it's a part of Hasidic Judaism. What is Hasidic Judaism? I'm not sure. It's just, I know it's a part of Hasidic Judaism. So Chabad, what does Chabad Judaism believe? Chabad Judaism believes in the fact that there are two Jewish messiahs. Call it the lesser Messiah or the minor Messiah and the major Messiah. The major Messiah is the one that brings around the one world kingdom of peace, prosperity, where Jews will be very happy and celebrate and finally find relief from their perceived oppression. But the minor Messiah, and what do they call these two Messiahs? The minor Messiah is Messiah ben Joseph. Yeah, Messiah ben Joseph, meaning Messiah from the Joseph lineage of prophets. And the major Messiah is Messiah ben David, the Messiah that comes down the lineage of King David, right? The one who establishes the kingdom here. So Chabad Judaism recognizes Messiah ben Joseph as a messianic figure that suffered oppression and injustice, and against all those odds, comes to triumph. But he's not a survivor. He's a type of figure that could get assassinated along the way. But what the minor Messiah does is plant the seeds and till the soil so that the major Messiah, Messiah ben David, can actually emerge to be successful and triumphant and accomplish, what I call Pax Judaica, right? So this is what Chabad Judaism teaches, and this is what's in Netanyahu's head. So come back all the way to what we were discussing a little bit earlier about, does it really matter who they replace Biden with? I say from, an eschatological perspective, no, because I see Trump has already having been set up as a savior figure, and I believe, because it's comical, the type of persecution that they've put him through. They find some hooker by crook to, make him what do they call him? An accused criminal, a charged criminal, whatever Biden said.
Convicted. He's a convicted felon.
That's the language. Thank you.
Unlike Joe Biden, who's an unconvicted felon.
You're right. So, by hook or by crook, they had to get to this label slapped on Trump's forehead, because it's all about, again, wagging the dog, getting people to see Trump as a potential savior figure, but one that has been persecuted and abused and maligned and mistreated, but despite it all has emerged, to some degree of triumph and success. He's overcome all of this persecution to regain his esteem, his leadership position as president of the United States. And so I see Trump as being groomed and set up for this by the Netanyahu government, by Israel, over the past number of years. I can't cite specific examples. You can do some research online if you're speaking to the listening audience here. If you're curious, just do a little bit of Googling. But Israel, I think it was the Temple Institute, they minted a coin with Trump's head on it. Just like in Canada, we've got the king's or the queen's head on the reverse of our coins. They've got a coin minted with Trump's head, and they're likening him to a liberator for Israel. They liken him to King Cyrus of Persia, who defeated the Babylonian Empire in order to allow the Jews then to return back to their promised land after being captive in ancient Babylon for a period of time, right? So they look at Trump and they've groomed Trump in that way. Now, Trump is very easy to groom. I'm not saying he's a stupid man, but his fundamental character flaw is his vanity and his ego, right? So all you have to do is flatter the guy a little bit, and he starts nodding yes and listening. That's my impression of him from long before his days in politics, long before his time on TV as The Apprentice. As a much younger person, I read one of his books called The Art of the Deal, I think it was. I was just curious at that time, Trump, maybe there's something to learn from this successful man. I read the book and I couldn't, get halfway through it because it was such egotistical vainglorious garbage. Yeah, my mom found it in her basement the other day. It's like, oh, this is an old book of yours. Do you want it for your library at your house? And I was like, no, you can throw that out, Mom. I should have thrown that out 20 years ago when I actually tried reading it. But he's very easy to play, and I think he sees himself very much as being a savior, somebody who can bring Israel onto the right path. But I think he's destined to fail in that exercise because we didn't talk about this last time, Rich, but I don't think you can just float down. Like if you're Gog and Magog and your goal is to hijack the eschatological narrative, the Jewish eschatological narrative, in order to fashion up a Pax Judaica, I don't think you can just bring in a messianic figure because the rest of the world, or the rest of the Abrahamic world, the Christians and the Jews, Christians and the Muslims, pardon me, have been taught through their religion to expect a false Messiah, right? And you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm going to stop you there.
Yeah.
Because I want to bring Tom in. So, Tom, anything you want to come in on what Faisal said? And then Faisal, also, at some point, I want you to say something about Gog and Magog and who are they? All right, but
Sure.
Tom, you go first.
All right. As long as I have actual bandwidth. What I'd say is everything Faisal said about Trump, I agree with. Like, I understand the fundamental problem. I've always understood the fundamental problem with Trump is that, he's flatterable. His vanity knows no bounds. And because of that, he is. I think this is a point that I've made, repeatedly. That's why I have a fundamental problem with Trump is that he's a very easy man to manipulate. And so you can, and the more you push him into this role of wanting to save the United States or save, he wants to save everybody, right? It feeds his ego, it feeds his need. I mean, I watched, was it Tucker Carlson the other? No, I was listening to Tulsi Gabbard's book. Actually, I started listening to the audiobook of her book, and she said, "Look, I've met President Trump. I've spent time with him. He does sincerely want to fix what's wrong. Like he has a real fundamental desire at this point. He may have been a selfish, bad man in the past, or whatever you want to look at him, but this is." And it's been kind of my read on Trump for a long time is like, look, you hit a certain stage in your life and you're like, I did a lot of shitty things when I was younger. I did this, and this. And now like I can see I have to have a legacy that's bigger than that. Right. Yeah. It's that top layer of the cake thing that Gary North talked about that I took to heart. And that's why I'm on the path I'm on today. Right.
Yeah.
It all makes perfect sense. So getting a sense from people who don't have any reason to say nice things about Donald Trump. Gabbard doesn't have anything really, unless she's angling for a cabinet position, and maybe she is, but she doesn't have to say that. She could have just as easily said all these terrible things about the Democrats in her book. She didn't have to take time to say those things. And then listening to her read her own words, it was clear she believed that. Like it's one thing to be reading your work and whatnot, and just get through it. And there's other times when, you can tell that the words that are being spoken matter to the person. And so you can feel that whenever you listen to a person talk. And so I want to throw that in there to ensure that, Trump doesn't need to be a part of it. It could easily be that unwitting,
exactly
enabler of this horrific shit, right?
Yeah.
So there it is.
An enabler of this horrific shit. I don't see him as some Machiavellian mastermind who's got his public persona, which is totally opposed to his private persona. I don't see that. I think he's just a guy who can be played, who is being played, who believes in what he's doing, is not an evil man per se, but is being set up for something to come, much the way that we kind of witnessed Biden get set up last night on the debate stage. Right. So having, grooming Trump to be this sort of savior figure for Israel, tilling the soil for the major Messiah, satisfies the need of Chabad Judaism to tick those boxes of the Jewish eschatological narrative, such that they can get buy-in from the Jewish community, right? Behind, the stepping stones, the unfolding of this progress towards this Pax Judaica. Okay, from a
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, I know it's hard with the bad bandwidth, but as you were speaking, just to give everybody a frame of reference here, remember that sequence. Remember the great scene in Fellowship of the Ring, or that great moment in the Lord of the Rings where Frodo offers the ring to Gandalf, and Gandalf says, "No, will wield a terrible evil." And this is the metaphor. This is exactly what Tolkien was talking about in the Lord of the Rings, and so I bring this forward because of how intensely Christian and how remember, Lord of the Rings is a Christian parable. Tolkien spent 20 years working through while writing the Lord of the Rings and taking huge breaks because he could not work it all out from his design goal of the Lord of the Rings was to tell a uniquely Christian parable in that respect. So I'm just trying to I bring that up simply to let's add some meat to the stew, because there's overlap with all of these eschatological teachings, or however you want to put it. There's overlap here.
Yeah, exactly. So like I was trying to describe, setting up Trump to be this sort of savior figure who tries to clean up the crazy things that Israel is doing, maybe weed out some of what people view as the sinful aspects of Judaism and of Israel. Again, tilling the field in advance of whoever they plan on bringing down as their major Messiah, right? So that's from a Jewish perspective, and why the Chabad people in Judaism would want to be grooming the guy. From a non-Jewish perspective, within Abrahamic religions, so from the Christians and the Muslim perspective, who are like, well, the first Messiah is going to be the false Messiah, it sets up Trump, perfectly. Again, speaking as the Chabad guys, or Gog and Magog, let me put it that way. From Gog and Magog's perspective, they're like, okay, we need to make sure that we play this out in such a way that the Jews find it credible, but we also need to play it out in a way that the non-Jews find it credible. And so if Trump comes along and is treated like a savior messianic figure and then fails, the non-Jews can look at that and go, ha, so we did see the false Messiah, Trump, he failed, and now whoever gets floated down will be the true Messiah. We can accept whoever comes down as being the true Messiah. Now, Judaism rejected Christ as the Messiah, period, right? That is what the definition of from an Islamic perspective, that is the definition of Judaism. Those Israelites that rejected Christ are the Jews. Those that accepted are the Christians. So whoever the major Messiah is in Judaism, the second Messiah figure that the world gets to see come down, is still not going to be Jesus Christ. He will call himself the one true Messiah, because that is what the false Messiah does. He is an imposter. He mimics the real true Messiah. So he may say what he says, but from a Jewish perspective, it's like, okay, we had our minor Messiah. He's gone, Messiah ben Joseph. And now we've got our Messiah ben David. Great, let's celebrate. From a non-Jewish perspective, they can look and go, see the false Messiah, that was Trump. He got vanquished, defeated, whatever. Now we've got our real Messiah. Let's all celebrate. But lo and behold, it's not actually the true Messiah. And so this is why, through many of my tweets on Twitter over the course of the last 3-4 months, I've been floating this idea, and it was just nagging at me. It's like, yeah, I see that this anti-Semitism has been drummed up by design because it pushes the world towards the Armageddon, the pogrom to end all pogroms, as the phrase that I've coined here. It pushes the world there. But then if they just bring down a messianic figure and say, look, we're saving Israel from its own self, here's now Pax Judaica, but all the Muslims are going to say, no way, I don't buy it. All the Christians are going to say, no, I don't buy it. Because what about the false Messiah? So I was like, well, they got to put out a decoy false Messiah. And so I was toying with that and working with that, and I wasn't really comfortable until after last night's debate. and I saw the debate, and I saw how clearly they were setting it up for a Trump victory, even though I suspected he was going to win anyway. But I got to see some real world evidence of the setup. And then I reflect back on all this other stuff about his grooming that I've been sort of compiling and filing in my mind. And I'm like, this is it. This is what they're doing. And I went back to some of my old research from years ago, and I pulled up stuff. I was like, oh, I forgot that they believe in two messiahs, a minor messiah and a major messiah within Hasidic Judaism, within Chabad Judaism. And it's because the Chabad guys are the ones who are in control here, this is how they're probably going to end up playing it out. You know, set him up as the minor guy. Like, you know, people are talking about he's going to be assassinated, this, that, or the other. I can totally see that happening at some point. I don't wish death upon the guy. I don't wish that he's assassinated. I'm just saying that, you know, the minor messiah doesn't succeed in Jewish eschatology. He's not the guy that brings about the kingdom of peace and prosperity, the one world kingdom. He's the guy that is, you know, plays, it's not even wingman. It's, I'll just stick with the terminology, minor messiah, not the major messiah.
Tom, you want to respond to what Faisal said?
Well, I know I can see what he's saying, and I'm not even like I like the big question here, of course, is like everything else, and that, you know, this is one way of viewing all of this, and the question you always have to ask yourself is, you know, is it live or is it Memorex? Is that really what's going on here, or are they just making this shit up as they go along? I don't know. I'm not in any way, manner, shape, or form trying to discount any of this, because Faisal and I have been talking about this behind the scenes for months now, and I just find it fascinating to see how it is playing out. And if they were going to, well, again, if that's the case, let's just take that as given. Let's just like, all right, here's our thought experiment for the day. Here's our physics thought experiment. Here are the boundary conditions to the problem. If they are doing that, then the pick of Trump's VP is a very important figure.
Yeah.
Because here's our false messiah, Trump. Trump's going to get assassinated. Whoever Trump picked as his VP then gets to be cast as, is it Trump's VP that winds up being the real thing that they're trying to bring about here? So is this, again, I think back to Reagan,
I don't think so.
George H.W. Bush. I think about how they took down Richard Nixon, gave us first Nelson Rockefeller, and, you know, I mean, like, this is okay. I'm just throwing it out there. Okay.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I mean, it's worthy of discussion. But if we go back to what Islamic eschatology tells us about how the process all plays out, the sequence of events, rather, is that first you have so the way it's described in Islam is at the time that Jerusalem becomes center stage in the world, while at the same time Medina, which is Islam's second holiest city, while at the same time Medina is a thing of inconsequence, nobody even knows that it exists anymore. At that time, then comes the Great War, the Armageddon. Okay, and after Armageddon comes, then comes the recapture of Constantinople by a Muslim army. Now, that's something that can get unpacked and explored, because a lot of people will say, well, I thought Turkey was, maybe it's a secular nation, but it's a secular Islamic nation. What do you mean that Constantinople by a Muslim army? Right. So that deserves some unpacking, either today or in the future. Sure. After the recapture of Constantinople comes the advent of the false Messiah. Okay? So that's when the false Messiah emerges before us and proclaims himself to be the Messiah. Okay? So, you know, the false Messiah has to be born. I mean, it's going to be a human figure, right? So the false Messiah somehow or another has to be born and has to mature up into a roughly, it's supposed to be, 30, 40-year-old sort of guy, right? So all that time during his lifetime, he's not the false Messiah. He's only false once he declares himself, I am the Messiah, right? He can't be the false Messiah without trying to convince people that he is the Messiah. I don't know if that makes sense. But in Islam, you have to exercise ruthless levels of logic, right? So in order for it to start to connect and make sense, and for us to be able to arrive at truth, ruthless levels of logic. So he's only really the false Messiah after the point that he claims he is the false Messiah, or that he is the Messiah.
Can he not be the false Messiah because of people's misguided belief in him?
Yes, but they won't know to believe in him until he announces, "Y'all need to believe in me."
Okay, I'm looking at it from
so this is not so if I understand this correctly, let's just unpack this just to make sure I understand this correctly. You're talking about a figure that emerges well after this period.
Yeah, well after being
history.
Yeah, exactly. So going back, rewinding a little bit on the sequence of events. First, you have the Armageddon, right? Okay, so Jerusalem, center stage in the world, Medina forgotten. Then you have the Great War, Armageddon. Then, after a period, and it's a little ambiguous, but it's either 7 months or 7 years, and I'm inclined to believe it's 7 months because things I've read, it seems to make more sense that it's 7 months. But within a period, after a period of 7 months, a Muslim army recaptures Constantinople. Okay. Why is that actually relevant? Let's unpack it a little bit. So, number one, in 1450, I think it was 1452, the Ottomans didn't capture Constantinople from the Christians in a manner that could fulfill the Islamic prophecy of Constantinople will be captured by a Muslim army. Why? Because there's
Why is that?
Because there's a promulgation in Islam that says if your opponent in war sues for peace, you are obligated to make peace. And what happened at the 11th hour before they finally started attacking the city walls? I think you would call him Emperor Constantine, sued for peace. And Sultan Mehmet rejected the offer for peace. If he was a true Muslim, if he acted as a true Muslim in that instance, there never would have been that war. He was obligated as a Muslim to make peace, and he didn't. So right then and there, on that one data point, we could say a Muslim army did not conquer Constantinople. Okay. Second thing, to reinforce the point that it was a very un-Islamic conquest of Constantinople, was once they broke through the city walls eventually after that long period of siege and bombardment, the first thing the Ottomans did was take hold of the Hagia Sophia church, the centerpiece, the quote-unquote Vatican of the Christian religion of the time, and converted it to a mosque. And in Islam, the conversion of churches and synagogues into mosques is forbidden. You're not allowed to do it. You're not supposed to do it because these are valid religions. They are not inferior to us, nor are they superior to us as Muslims. But you're not supposed to do it. They are supposed to be respected institutions, these churches, and you're supposed to let Jews live as Jews and Christians live as Christians. If one comes knocking on your door and says, "Teach me about Islam, I really want to learn," okay, you're obligated to teach what you can teach as a Muslim. And if they then choose to convert based on what they've heard from you, then go for it. Let them welcome them into your mosque for a conversion ceremony. But you should not be going on anybody's doors and knocking on them and saying, "Hey, let me teach you about Islam. I think I can show you the light and show you the way to truth." The truth is already there in Judaism and in Christianity. And it's like I said on the Sean Newman podcast, it's just a whole lot of human fuckery that took one religion, one message, and turned it into three. And beyond the three major, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, how many different sects and divisions and whatever do we have, right? It's just absolute human retardation that's gotten us here. So anyways, on those two data points, rejecting the opponent who sued for peace and saying, no, we're going to make war and we're going to capture you anyway, number one. Number two, taking the most important church, well, it could have been any church, but it happened to be the most important church of Christianity, and converting it into a mosque. There's no way Mehmet was acting as a Muslim. So the prophecy of Islam capturing Constantinople, a Muslim army capturing Constantinople, was never fulfilled. It is yet to be fulfilled. Right. And so the Great War, which is followed by the conquest of Constantinople, is very important, or I should say the conquest of Constantinople, which follows the Great War, is very, very important. Geopolitically, bring it to today's era. So if we go back, if we rewind to the first conversation I had with Rich on his podcast, whatever it was, a month ago or so, I talked about Dhul-Qarnayn. And you've heard me talk about how Dhul-Qarnayn is a character that iterates twice through history. And the current iteration appears by all measures from an Islamic perspective to be Vladimir Putin, right? Now, what is one of the challenges that Russia, Vladimir Putin, must endure? What is one of the constraints that they must endure? It's that their Black Sea fleet is locked in the Black Sea. NATO, which has nothing to do with Islam, right? It's part of the Judeo-Christian alliance. It's the attack dog of Zionism, basically, Operation Zionism, attack dog of Gog and Magog. If push comes to shove and Dhul-Qarnayn, Vladimir Putin, needs to fulfill his destiny of checkmating Gog and Magog, he can't just do it with his ships floating, running circles in the Black Sea. He's going to need access to the Mediterranean. And so the conquest of Constantinople by a Muslim army is very, very important because what is prophesied is that event is what cements the really deep, deep relationship of what Islam says love and affection between Islam and Eastern Christianity, which forms in the end times. Okay, because number one, those Muslims, because they're supposed to be a true Muslim army, right? It's a Muslim army that conquers Constantinople, will take Hagia Sophia and return it to Orthodox Christianity. Okay, undoing the stupidity of Sultan Mehmet from 1452. The next thing that they will do, because they have an alliance, is open up the Bosphorus Strait and the Marmara Sea and the Dardanelles and allow free passage of the Russian fleet into the Mediterranean. And once the Russian fleet can get into the Mediterranean, they can actually create that pincer move on Israel that might be needed, on Gog and Magog, basically, in Israel, in order to contain them. So that's why the conquest of Constantinople is so important. And it's only after the conquest of Constantinople that Islamic eschatology then says this false Messiah emerges. Because Gog and Magog's, the way I read that, what it means is the project of Pax Judaica comes under extreme threat, right? It's like now you got the Russians being able to make a move over land and by sea, flanking both sides of Israel. And now we need to float down the Messiah figure in order that humanity can say, Judaism can say, oh, look, the major Messiah has arrived. And the rest of the world can say, oh, look, the real Messiah, after the vanquishing of the false Messiah, has arrived. Let's embrace this. Let's go for it. But, Islam says differently.
The Russians have access to the Eastern Mediterranean with their long-term agreement with the Syrians of the port of Tartus. I don't know if you realize that's on the table. It's been in effect now since 2015, 2016.
Okay.
So why is NATO this is why Sevastopol is so important then. It's not just to deny the Russians a warm water port. It's to ensure that they have control over the entirety of the Black Sea. So Crimea was incredibly important. The British will never give up they've retreated now to Romania, my left, my right, on the Western Black Sea, in order to deal with this problem. And of course, why Erdogan in Turkey continues to play both sides against the middle in order to keep Turkey's relevance, modern Turkey's relevance in this entire thing, and why he becomes then, of course, the fulcrum on which all of this can turn, and why Turkey is now a country, between two worlds. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization and NATO. It's why everybody is refusing to budge on this point, and why every time Erdogan starts to take one too many steps towards the Russians, there's a currency crisis fomented in Turkey. There's that didn't work. Okay, fine. We'll give you F-16s. We'll give you this. We'll give Erdogan through Faisal's lens of all of this. What does he want? Well, of course, he wants to destroy the Greeks, right? He keeps threatening the Greeks for their, and so there's still this issue between the Turks and the Greeks over access to, to all of this, because, basically Turkey, as of right now, because of, the end of, I guess, was it the end of World War I? This is where my history will, of course, be shoddy, and someone will, tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, and they would be right. But at some point, Turkey winds up being, modern Turkey exists on what is traditionally Greek land.
Yeah.
Right. The Western Turkey is Greece. It's Thrace. Right. If I have my Greek.
Well, Helen of Troy was Greek, and Troy is on Western Turkey.
That should be Greek land, and Erdogan continues. Same story, and this is all part of that same story. And in some ways, it tracks brilliantly with the idea that we have "quote unquote" fake Muslims in charge of Constantinople. I mean, this Istanbul, Constantinople.
Yep.
Is that am I off on that? Does that make sense?
You cut out a little bit, but I think I captured everything that you were trying to say. But I'll grab onto what you said about fake Muslims. Absolutely, fake Muslims, because what does Islam teach to Muslims? And then to anybody who reads the book, I brought it up with Sean Newman. The critics of Islam like to say that it's a hateful religion because it tells you to hate the Jews and to hate the Christians and to kill them all. No, it's contextual. It's contextual. You have to understand the context of where where Islam is coming from on this. It says, beware of forming friendships and alliances with those Jews and with those Christians who are friends and allies of each other. Right? It says, beware the Judeo-Christian alliance, in other words. And if you go back to how Islam defines Judaism and how it defines Christianity, those who rejected Christ versus those who accepted Christ, what the heck is the Judeo-Christian alliance? It's an unholy alliance. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because from a first principle standpoint, these are, one's a 0, the other one's a 1. One's black, one's white. You can't make an alliance between the two opposites. Just spend a little bit of time noodling it, listening audience I'm speaking to. Exercise some logic and rationale. It's like, that doesn't make sense. You rejected, I accepted, now I'm going to make an alliance with you? How does that work? On a holy level, how does that work? On a religious level? It doesn't work. It's bogus. And so that is what Islam warns against. And that is exactly what Turkey has done, is it's made friends and allies with the Judeo-Christian alliance, because, like I come back to, NATO is simply the attack dog of Gog and Magog, and Gog and Magog's big project is Pax Judaica, Zionism. Zionism is, what is the product of the Judeo-Christian alliance? It's Zionism, right? So, talking about false Muslims, there you go.
Okay.
That's why Islam prophesies a recapture of Constantinople.
Well, how does this play into what's happening with Israel now?
Well, with Israel now, for me, it's quite simple. It's like, how do we get the world to gang up against Judaism and Israel, the nation? How do we get to Armageddon? Because now you can reopen up the book of Jewish eschatology. And what does Jewish eschatology teach? It teaches that before the Messiah arrives, Armageddon happens, and Jewish eschatology speaks of Gog and Magog. getting the rest of the world outside of Israel to gang up against Israel and the Jews and push them to extermination. That is Armageddon from the Jewish eschatological perspective, the Great War to eliminate Jews and Israel. What I call the pogrom to end all pogroms. That is what Jewish eschatology says. And so, if you're one of these traitorous Jews, because Jewish eschatology prophesies a traitorous faction of Jews from within who conspire and collaborate with Gog and Magog and turn against Judaism, working from within to get Gog and Magog to be successful in getting the world to gang up against Israel. So what's going on in Israel now? I think we touched upon it in our first discussion, Rich. They stand down on October 7th and let the news reports are coming out on a regular basis now. They had pre-knowledge of this attack. They knew what was going on. And, it's very fishy business on October 7th, the day of. Alex Craner has talked about it at length. And then what's equally befuddling is the extent of heavy-handedness in response. Now, Israel's always had a bit of a heavy hand when it responds, but it's gotten to the point of absurdity, right? And
Israel is being isolated, is being
exactly.
hated and sanctioned by increasing numbers of countries.
Yep.
And then that ties into your thesis, Tom, that the whole design is to isolate the US and Israel, to bring US down in order to elevate the status of Europe.
When Faisal and I first identified this, Faisal had Gog and Magog mapped as the US and the UK, the British and the Americans. And I said, well, when you really stop to think about it, I've been talking about this in terms of the old British neoconservatives and the Europeans, right? And that really it's the Europeans who you could look at as one head of this. And then the United States is kind of like, they're also, they've been grafted onto this, but it's really, it's in everybody's, the British have their imperatives. They want to control the maritime sea. Europe wants to institute global government. They both want to institute global governance. They just want to do it to be in charge. Afterwards, I think, is the ultimate fight. But to me, it's as much a two-headed snake as anything else. It's still the old and the old Europeans who are part of this as well. And don't forget, let's not discount the what's the word I'm looking for? The pervasiveness of these quote unquote fake Jews or, evil Jews, whatever you want to call them, are all across Europe. You can't separate, British Jews out from European Jews or from American Jews. So you have this thing is a little bit less settled, as it's easy to point to the Americans and the British when it's the Europeans are clearly have their hand because they're the ones now pushing the whole anti-Israel position in response to October for everybody to hate the Jews. Rishi Sunak is pro-Palestinian. Europe is pro-Palestinian, and it's Donald Trump and the Americans who are pro-Israeli. And so now who's really Gog and Magog? Pro-Israeli, but still fundamentally kind of anti-war. So in so many ways, it's like the U.S. is being set up to be the false bad guy in this whole thing, and because we have political leadership that maps either to the British or to the Europeans. At the end of the day, they're two sides of the same coin or two wings of the same bird of prey. They're Gog and Magog, and America's being dragged along as, like, in some ways kind of like Turkey having made an unholy alliance, because we have this very strong dispensationalist that whole the dispensationalist that's the other word that gets used all the time. I can't think of it right now. The evangelical Americans, thank you, who have been taught that our future is tied to that of Israel. Between the Scofield Bible, the Mormons, they all believe that stuff, and so that's all part of their. So then that was all seeded into America in the 1820s and the 1830s.
Yeah.
And so you can see how this is all kind of laid itself out. So now the question is, does the U.S. avoid the trap?
Right.
And if they do, then all of this breaks apart. And
Yep.
that's, in many ways, it's kind of what I've been arguing we should be doing. And whether or not we're going to do it or not is a different story.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And
So
they don't escape the trap under Biden, but they could under Trump, and with the Chevron defense.
well, I don't think Trump is if we go back and we look at from an eschatological perspective, his role is to till the soil. He will meet his own demise, but to till the soil. I mean, you can't rescue America because America is a great nation. It's a very powerful nation. Just take it down to the fact that it's got a big landmass surrounded by water, rich in resources, and heavily populated, right? So it is a powerful country. You cannot fashion out a Pax Judaica without taking apart and dismantling Pax Americana properly. So I don't think, I think that's, one of the reasons, one of the angles, one of the talking points we're going to have in the future as to why Trump has emerged as a false savior. And the other reason he's going to emerge as a false savior, now just speaking from as a Christian or a Muslim, while we'll look at him as a false Messiah, is that at the same time he will bring about Armageddon, because he'll be doing all this stuff to patch up and make good the appearance and the behavior of Israel, and the Muslim world, let's just say, the Hamas and the Hezbollah and the Iranians, whoever, they're going to be looking at it and going, this, you are acting as the false savior. And so I think that is what ultimately brings out, like, I posted a little table on Twitter. I should find it again, and I just mapped out what it might look like. So you're going to get a guy that has a lot of really good things, a lot of really promising and encouraging things to say, enough for us to say, look, he is acting as our savior, but it's going to fall short. He's going to fail. Armageddon is going to ensue, and that lays the groundwork. Again, speaking from Islamic eschatology perspective, that lays the groundwork then for the recapture of Constantinople by a Muslim army, which then brings about the appearance for the first time, the proclamation of, hey, look, I am actually the real Messiah. I don't think Trump is ever going to declare himself as being the Messiah, because that's not what the minor Messiah would do from a Jewish perspective. But I think he's going to do enough that the rest of the world might look at him and go, he's trying to pretend he's the real Messiah here, and go after him and unleash Armageddon during his presidency, during that 4-year term. Okay. So, and, going back to what Tom was saying, and I mentioned it on the Sean Newman podcast, one of the risks of trying to simplify a very complex subject is that you can oversimplify, and in oversimplification you can end up being misleading. And that's really what was happening when I characterized Gog and Magog as being Britain, Gog, Magog, the US. It's much more than that, because what Islam says is that Gog and Magog multiply proliferously across the face of the earth, attracting new recruits essentially through their allure of wealth and power. And so you will find them everywhere. So Gog and Magog, if we need to put them into a little box and wrap a bow around it, what I said on the Sean Newman podcast was, it's all those people who are wittingly or unwittingly, willingly or unwillingly, laboring to advance this juggernaut of a project called Operation Zionism. I would characterize all those people as Gog and Magog. And that once you're in Gog and Magog, you're not doomed for life. You can shake the cobwebs and the nonsense out of your head and realize that materialism is not everything to life, and choose to apply your labor in other ways, in better ways, and not become a part and not remain a part of Gog and Magog. But I gave the example on that podcast that I certainly was a very, very minor member of Gog and Magog once upon a time. I had an internship in Canary Wharf at a bank. And I was doing what I was doing, and we know the role that the banksters play in all of this, so I don't need to describe all that. But I made a choice, nothing to do with eschatology or religion or whatever, but I looked at my options. I could take my full-time offer after that internship and remain in London with banking, and drive a dagger through my dad's heart back in Canada and say, no, I'm never coming back to Canada. I'm going to make my own way over here and screw your family business and your vision and everything you had as an immigrant. Or I could do, the dutiful son thing. And, I was young enough that it wasn't so much of a risk. And I chose the difficult choice at that age, a difficult choice because, high life, well paid in Europe, jet setting around on the weekends, skiing in the Alps and French Riviera in the summer or whatever. Or I could go back to Canada. I chose Canada.
Very good, Faisal. Now, is what you said about Zionism brings us back to where we came in at the beginning, and I think this is a good opportunity also for us to have. If there's anything, Tom, you want to say to finish up, and also you as well, Faisal, to finish up, and I'll have the links if people want to get more conversant with this way of looking at what's going on in the world. And Tom, you appear to have frozen again. Anything you want to say, Tom?
What I'll say is the following. I think Faisal's point about, this is a very, very complex unpacking that we have to do here of a lot of different things. And again, you don't have to believe that the people who are, implementing a lot of this stuff believe any of this. Many of them are easily just going about doing what they do. And, they exist purely to just, look, this is what I've been taught to believe. This is my imprinting. This is my way of viewing the world. And but the one thing I would argue is that at the same time, they have been chosen to be placed in the positions that they're in on purpose to implement policy. That I think is something that is hard to argue with. Like, there's a reason why Ursula von der Leyen is running the European Union. There's a reason why they work so hard to ensure that she stays as leader of the European Union. Why Kaja Kallas is now going to be the top diplomat of the European Union. There's a reason for that, right? There's a reason why all of these people seem to never leave. They've been chosen, they were groomed to do this thing. And, I also believe that, they're also that the people who are doing this are trying to force that round peg into a square hole in order to try and wiggle their way out of what is clearly a storyline that, where they wind up on the losing end. So that's the way I see it. And, it doesn't matter, how you unpack that and from what framework you look at it. That's what I see.
Faisal, any last words from you?
Yeah, no, I just want to say
we got that, Tom. We got it.
No, I just wanted to say thanks again, Rich, for having us on and for allowing this subject to be explored. And I like the direction that you took us today because, I think what I've been doing up until today's podcast is really been justifying the relevance of the eschatological perspective and trying to illustrate why it's valid in the current era. But I think what's perhaps even more interesting and more important is what we did today, which is to look forward from where we stand. Okay, if eschatology is valid and we accept that, then let's look forward. What comes next? What can we anticipate? And in being able to anticipate those things, what are the moves that we can do for ourselves, whether individually or as families or as communities? Because, as I said on the Sean Newman podcast, I think we're past the point of no return on the eschatological playbook overall. I don't believe we're necessarily, this is me speaking, it's not necessarily the way it's going to play out, but my gut says we're not going to be able to stop this now. I think, unfortunately, World War III or Armageddon or whatever you want to call it is in the cards. How brief it is and how intense it is remains to be seen, but I think it's by necessity it has to get played out. For various reasons, we've heard Tom talk about the necessity of it because of the debt situation, and we've heard about it from other people and their perspectives. But I introduced my own justification for why it needs to happen from an eschatological perspective as well. So, you add up all those things. It's hard to say that now we're going to be able to skate by and avert this catastrophe that we're making for ourselves. But looking forward, there's things that we can do. It's not past the point of no return for doing what's right for ourselves and for our families and communities. Yes. That there's still time for. And so that's why I think this discussion is important.
And I'm going to put my little oar in here now, right? And it's a slight counter to what you said, Faisal, which is, I think and you may agree with me, actually, I think you will agree with me, but I'm coming from a different perspective, that on the other side of this, on the other side, of the major disruption, if you can reduce a possible World War to a major disruption, is a whole better world for everybody.
Oh
Much,
yeah,
much
that I
better.
believe. Yep.
We are going through a global breakdown of the old order.
Yep.
But on the other side, it's much, much better for all of humanity. And
Absolutely.
my piece on this is, and I say it from what I've learned in my participation as somebody who's versed in the work of Landmark Worldwide, but also as a child protection social worker, that I think what gives strength and power to analysis is lots and lots of different perspectives. So there is something happening out there. There are things happening, and then there's all sorts of interpretations. You know, there's the interpretation with regards to the debt system. There's astrology. There's what you've talked about, Faisal, from different eschatological perspectives. And then for me as a social worker, I look at what's going on in the household from what the GP's saying, what the school's saying, what the mum's saying, what the dad's saying, what the children are saying, and try and put it together to work out what on earth is going on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same at a macro level.
Mm-hmm.
So none of this is gospel. And if it's useful, run with it and add more to it. Look at it from over here and look at it from over there and look at it over here and follow Faisal on Twitter. One of the things about your Twitter thread, Faisal, and your Twitter followers is they're incredibly, incredibly smart and erudite. It's really, really great exchanges. It's not the sort of foul-mouthed insults that get hurled.
Well, there's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of that.
There's a little bit of that, right? There's always a bit of that on Twitter.
There was a guy that tweeted yesterday on one of my threads, and he was just saying that, Islam is a garbage religion, this, that, and the other. So I just responded back that, well, I guess what you're saying is that there is only one true religion. I wish somebody had told me that earlier. And he kept persisting because he wanted to engage me. And then I just said, well, guess what? I'm a bot. And you have 33% more followers than I do. Therefore, you must be 33% more superior to me. You must be right. Count yourself a winner and carry on.
Professor, that's very, very gracious of you. But you won't find that sort of grace in Tom's responses. So, like I said,
never.
Also, there's room for all sorts of perspectives that are useful. Faisal's grace and the worst version of Tom on Twitter. All right.
Great.
I will have the links in the description below for your Twitter, Faisal. And you are just on Twitter, really, right?
Yeah, it's just Twitter.
Yeah. Tom, you were saying something?
Nope.
Okay.
Not at all.
And then Go Goats and Guns plus Twitter, and do follow them and subscribe, share, all that business. And between now and when I see you next, please keep filling your pockets with wisdom and knowledge. Tom, Faisal, Crypto Rich, Allah Hafiz. God be with you.
Thanks, Rich.